Chapter 1. A Whisper of Joy. The scent of crushed moon petal and silver leaf clung to Elena's fingers. It was a good smell. A clean one. Outside her small hut, the wind sang a low song through the pines of the Blackwood Pack territory. But in here was peace. A clay pot simmered over a low flame, its steam carrying the earthy aroma of a healing salve. Everything in its place. Everything calm. This little pocket of the world was hers, a sanctuary she had built with her own 2 hands, a life she had fought for. The door creaked open, letting in a swirl of cold air that smelled of pine and distant snow. Draven. His smile was the first thing she saw, and it warmed her better than any fire. He was broad-shouldered and strong, his dark hair falling over eyes the color of a stormy sea. But his gaze on her was always gentle. Always. He held up a thin, folded piece of paper, like a prize. The elder brought it back from the human town. Elena wiped her hands on her apron, her heart giving a happy little thump against her ribs. She took the image, her fingers tracing the grainy, black and white outline. A tiny shape. A new life. Their life. A wave of love so fierce and so complete washed over her. It was a feeling so big it almost scared her. "He's perfect," she whispered, her voice thick. Draven's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as he looked down at the image with her. His touch was solid. Real. "He?" Draven chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "You're so sure." "A mother knows," Elena murmured, leaning back into his strength. I think we should name him Kalen. After the first wolf of the mountain?" He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "A strong name. I like it." They stood there for a long moment, just breathing together. The world outside, with all its pack politics and ancient laws, simply faded away. There was only the scent of herbs, the warmth of the fire, and the silent promise in a blurry picture. It was everything she had ever wanted. A quiet love, a safe home, a family. Then, Draven's arms tensed, just a little, but she felt it. A subtle shift in the current of their perfect moment. Elena tilted her head back to look at him. The smile was still on his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. A shadow had passed over them. "What is it?" she asked, her own calm starting to fray at the edges. He took a slow breath, his gaze shifting to the dancing flames. "Alpha Kale has called a meeting." He paused, and the weight of that pause was heavy, cold. A private meeting, just the inner circle. Elena's stomach tightened. The inner circle was for war, for challenges, for things that broke the peace she cherished so deeply. She smoothed her hand over the ultrasound image, a sudden sharp need to protect the tiny life within her rising like a shield. The quiet joy of a moment ago already felt like a memory, a fragile thing that was about to be swept away. Chapter 2. A Scent of Fear. When Draven finally returned, the moon was high and cold in the sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor of their hut. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the salve was cooling on the hearth. Elena had tried to keep busy, sorting herbs, cleaning her tools, anything to keep the worry from taking root. But the silence stretched. It grew teeth. Now, seeing him in the doorway, the worry bloomed into a cold, sharp dread. He didn't look at her. That was the first sign. He just stood there, his big frame filling the entrance, bringing the chill of the night in with him. He was usually so quick to close the door, to shut the world out and wrap her in his arms, but tonight he seemed to be holding the darkness close. "Draven?" she said, her voice small in the quiet room. He moved then, shutting the door with a soft click that sounded like a lock turning. He walked over to the wash basin, his movement stiff, mechanical. He splashed water on his face, hiding from her gaze. But she could smell it. His scent. It was always a comfort to her, a familiar mix of pine, earth, and him. Tonight, something else was tangled in it, something sour and ugly. Fear. That was part of it. A deep, animal fear. But there was something else underneath. Something she couldn't name. It was sharp, metallic, like the scent of a lie. "The meeting ran late," he said, his voice flat. He kept his back to her, drying his face with a rough cloth. "What was it about?" Elena asked, pushing herself up from her chair. She walked toward him slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Is everything all right?" He finally turned, but his eyes were guarded. The stormy gray shuddered and distant. "The Alpha. He has a vision for the pack." Draven's words were careful, weighed. "A new alliance with the Blood Moon Pack." Elena froze. The Blood Moon Pack? They were savages. Ruthless killers who believed strength was the only law and mercy was a disease. Their reputation was a bloody stain on the history of the territories. Why would their alpha, a man who preached tradition and honor, even consider such a thing? It made no sense. "An alliance?" she repeated, the word tasting like poison. "Why? What would we gain from them besides bloodshed?" "Power," Draven said, and the single word was heavy with a meaning she didn't want to understand. "Strength. Kyle says our pack has grown soft. That any weakness must be cut out before it spreads." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air crept over Elena's skin. The way he said weakness, it sounded like a quote, like a lesson learned and repeated. She looked at the man she loved, the father of her child, and for the first time, she saw a stranger looking back. The ambition she had always known was there, usually a quiet spark, now seemed like a hungry flame licking at the edges of his soul. She reached for him, wanting to pull him back, to find her Draven in there somewhere. "But we are strong," she insisted. "Our strength is in our family, in our bonds." He pulled away from her touch, just a slight flinch, but it felt like a slap. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He couldn't. And in that moment, Elena knew, the meeting wasn't just about an alliance. It was about a purge, and the lie she smelled on him. It wasn't just a lie. It was a betrayal waiting to happen. Chapter 3. The First Stone. The next morning, the poison started to spread. It began as a whisper, a sidelong glance from a packmate gathering water at the stream, a door that closed a little too quickly as she passed. The air in the village, usually filled with the comfortable sounds of pack life, felt thin, brittle. Elena tried to ignore it. She told herself it was her imagination, just nerves from Draven's strange behavior the night before. But the feeling grew, a cold knot in her belly that tightened with every strange look. Then came Anya. Anya was an elder she-wolf, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, and her scent a mix of dried herbs and old grudges. She had never been fond of Elena, always seeing her as an outsider because her healing knowledge came from her grandmother, not from pack tradition. She cornered Elena near the communal fire, her dark eyes narrowed to slits. "There are whispers," Anya said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp. She didn't bother to lower it. She wanted others to hear. Elena kept her chin up, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "Whispers are for cowards who are afraid to speak the truth." Anya gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Oh, this is about truth, little healer." She took a step closer, her presence imposing. "They say you've been wandering, that your loyalty isn't to this pack, that the child you carry—" She let the words hang in the air, thick and foul. "Is tainted." The word hit Elena like a physical blow. Tainted. It was an old, ugly word, a word used for pups born of betrayal, of unions forbidden by pack law. It was a death sentence. Her hand flew to her stomach, a desperate, protective gesture. Her baby. Her perfect, wanted child. "That's a lie." Elena's voice trembled, but she filled it with steel. A vile, vicious lie. Is it? Anya's eyes scanned the small crowd that was now gathering, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and growing suspicion. Your mate seems to think there's some truth to it. Elena's head snapped around, searching for Draven. He was there, standing near the edge of the clearing, watching, not defending her, not rushing to her side, just watching. His face was a blank mask, his eyes hollow. He saw her looking, saw the desperate plea in her expression, and he looked away. That was it. That was the moment her world fractured. The whispers weren't just gossip. They were a weapon, a story crafted with cruel precision. The strange looks, Anya's accusation, Draven's cold distance. It was all connected. A web being woven around her. And the man who was supposed to be her partner, her protector, he was letting it happen. He was holding the thread. The first stone had been cast, not by an enemy, but by the man who held her heart. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that more were about to follow. Chapter 4. The Shattering. They gathered her in the Great Clearing, the heart of the Pack's territory. The sky was a hard, unforgiving gray, spitting a cold mist that clung to Elena's skin. A ceremonial fire roared in the center, its flames eating the damp air, but it offered no warmth. There was no warmth here. Not today. She stood alone, a space cleared around her as if she were carrying a plague. Every eye was on her, judging, condemning. She searched the crowd for a friendly face, for a flicker of doubt, and found nothing but cold certainty. Draven stood beside Alpha Kale near the fire. He looked smaller, somehow, diminished by the sheer presence of the Alpha. Kale was a massive wolf of a man, his power a physical force that pressed down on the air, demanding respect. He raised a hand, and a hush fell over the pack. "We are a family," Kale began, his voice a deep thunder that rolled across the clearing. "And like any family, we must protect ourselves from sickness, from poison that seeks to weaken us from within." His gaze, sharp and black as obsidian, landed on Elena. She flinched. "We are on the verge of a great new era of strength," he boomed. "An alliance that will secure our future for generations. But this future requires purity. It demands absolute loyalty. It cannot be built on a foundation of lies and betrayal." A murmur rippled through the pack, an ugly, angry sound. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was a performance, a well-rehearsed play, and she was the sacrifice. She looked at Draven, her eyes begging him. "Say something. Stop this. Tell them the truth." He met her gaze then, for just a second, and in his eyes, she saw a flicker of something. Regret? Fear? But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a chilling emptiness. Kale placed a heavy hand on Draven's shoulder. "This loyal son of our pack has brought a dark truth to light. He has suffered the deepest of betrayals." He turned to Draven. "Tell them." Draven stepped forward. He looked not at the pack, but at Elena. The world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them, a million miles of cold air between them. His voice, when he spoke, was not his own. It was a hollow echo, scraped raw of all love, all warmth, all memory of their life together. "She is not loyal," he said, the words falling like stones. "The child she carries is not mine." A collective gasp sucked the air from the clearing. The lie, now spoken aloud, became real. It took root in the earth. Elena's legs gave out, and she fell to her knees on the cold, damp ground. A sound tore from her throat, a raw, guttural cry of a soul being ripped in two. It wasn't just a lie. It was the death of everything. Her love, her family, her future. All of it turned to ash by the man who had sworn to protect it. "For this betrayal," Kale's voice thundered, a final, terrible judgment. She is cast out. She is nothing to us now. Let the wilderness claim the weak and the tainted. 2 guards grabbed her arms, hauling her to her feet. They dragged her away from the fire, away from her home. As they pushed her past the scent line that marked their border, she looked back one last time. Draven was still standing there, a statue of a man she no longer knew. The scents of her home, pine, wood smoke, pack, faded behind her. And ahead. Ahead was only the cold, empty scent of exile. And something else, faint and far away. Something ancient. The smell of blood and earth and stone. Chapter 5. A Breath to Fight. The wilderness was not kind. It was a place of sharp edges and deep shadows, a world that did not care if she lived or died. The first few days were a blur of walking. Elena just put one foot in front of the other, propelled by a grief so vast it left no room for thought. Her heart was a hollowed-out thing, a dead space in her chest. The Alpha's judgment echoed in her mind. Tainted, weak. Draven's empty eyes haunted her sleep. But then, the baby would kick. A tiny, persistent flutter from within, a reminder. It was a small, stubborn spark of life refusing to be extinguished. And for that spark, she had to fight. Her healer's knowledge, once a source of pride and community, was now her only tool for survival. Her eyes, which once looked for signs of sickness in her packmates, now scanned the forest floor for life. She found bitter roots she knew were safe to eat, their earthy taste a poor substitute for real food, but enough to quell the gnawing hunger. She followed the song of a hidden stream to find clean, cold water, cupping it in her hands and drinking until her teeth ached. Her body, heavy with child, protested. Her ankles swelled, her back screamed in agony, and a deep exhaustion settled into her bones. Every step was a monumental effort. She was a healer, but she could not heal the deep, aching weariness that was slowly winning. Some nights, curled beneath the meager shelter of a pine tree, the cold seeping into her, she would almost give in. The despair was a living thing, a predator that whispered to her in the darkness. It's over. Just let go. It would be so easy to just stop. But then, the kick. A little nudge. I'm still here. One afternoon, as the sun bled through the canopy in weak, watery shafts, she stumbled. Her foot caught on a gnarled root and she fell hard, the impact jarring her teeth. A sharp, searing pain shot through her side. She lay there, face pressed into the damp earth, the scent of rot filling her nose. Tears of frustration and pain tracked paths through the dirt on her cheeks. She was failing. Her body was giving up. She pressed a trembling hand to her swollen belly. I'm sorry, she whispered to the life inside her. I'm so sorry. I'm not strong enough. The baby shifted, a slow, rolling movement under her palm, as if in answer, as if to say, yes, you are. A quiet decision settled over her, a resolve as hard and cold as the stones beneath her. She would not die out here. Draven, Kale, the pack. They had taken her life from her. They would not take this one, too. She would survive long enough to bring this child into the world. She would fight for this baby, even if it took the very last breath from her body. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Elena pushed herself up. She got to her feet, swaying, every muscle screaming. She took a step, then another. She would not be weak. She would not be tainted. She would be a mother. Chapter 6. The Cave of Echoes. The pain started as a dull ache in her lower back. At first, Elena dismissed it. Just another complaint from her exhausted body, another protest against the relentless hardship. She kept walking, her focus narrowed to the next tree, the next rock, the next breath. But the ache didn't fade. Instead, it grew, coiling and tightening with a slow, rhythmic pulse. It wasn't the pain of exhaustion. This was different. This was purposeful. Her breath hitched. No, not yet. It was too soon. Another wave crested, sharper this time. It seized her, stealing her breath and forcing a low gasp from her lips. She leaned against the rough bark of an ancient oak, her knuckles white as she gripped the wood. The forest floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of her pain. Here? Now? Alone? The wilderness, which had been a passive enemy, suddenly felt alive, hostile. The rustle of leaves sounded like whispers of doom. The shadows between the trees seemed to watch her, waiting. She needed shelter. Now. Her gaze darted around, frantic. There, a fissure in a rock face, almost hidden by overgrown vines. A dark opening that promised refuge from the prying eyes of the forest. She stumbled toward it, a fresh wave of pain making her cry out. It was a cave. Small, damp, and smelling of wet stone and ancient earth. It wasn't much, but it was a shield against the world. She collapsed just inside the entrance, her back scraping against the rough wall as she slid to the ground. The darkness inside was cool and absolute. For a long time, there was only the pain. It was a tide, pulling her under, then releasing her for a few precious moments before dragging her back down into its crushing depths. Her world shrank to the jagged rhythm of it. In the brief moments of calm, the terrifying reality of her situation crashed down on her. She was giving birth. Here, in a cold, dark hole in the ground, with no one, no warm hands to hold, no soft voice to soothe her, no healer to help if something went wrong. The sheer, overwhelming loneliness of it was almost as painful as the contractions. She was an animal, crawling away to a dark place to bring her young into the world alone. Another contraction hit, harder than any before. A scream tore from her, raw and desperate, swallowed by the stone walls of the cave. It echoed back at her, the sound of her own terror. Her strength was failing. The exhaustion she had been fighting for days was a heavy blanket, smothering the last of her resolve. She was so tired, so incredibly tired. As the pain receded, leaving her gasping and trembling in the dark, she felt a final crushing wave of despair. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the end the pack had sentenced her to die in the dirt, bringing a life into the world that would perish alongside her. Her vision blurred, the edges of the cave entrance fading to gray. Her time was running out. She closed her eyes, a single hot tear escaping to trace a path through the grime on her face. The darkness in the cave was pressing in, and soon it would be all that was left. Chapter 7. A King in the Shadows. A final desperate surge of strength. It came from a place deeper than muscle, deeper than bone. It was the primal, unbreakable will of a mother. With a cry that was half scream, half sob, Alina gave the last of herself to the darkness. And then, a new sound filled the cave. A thin, wavering cry. Her son. Relief, so powerful it felt like a physical blow, washed over her. She did it. He was here. He was alive. Using trembling arms, she gathered the small, warm body to her chest, her own ragged breaths mingling with his first. His scent filled her senses, a dizzying, intoxicating mix of newborn innocence and something else. Something ancient and powerful, like the smell of a storm gathering on a distant mountain. It was a scent unlike any wolf she had ever known. Exhaustion, held at bay for so long, came for her then. It was a black tide, pulling her down, down, down. Her vision tunneled. The baby's cries began to sound far away. This was it. She had kept her promise. She had brought him into the world, and now she could rest. But a new scent cut through the damp air of the cave. It wasn't wolf. It was something more, something older. It smelled of cold stone, of lightning striking a mountaintop, of a power so immense it made the very air tremble. A shadow fell over the entrance of the cave, blocking out what little light remained. It was huge. A silhouette of a man so large he had to duck to enter the small opening. He moved with a silence that was terrifying, a predator's grace that made no sound on the rocky floor. Elena's heart, which had been slowing, gave a frantic, terrified leap. Her arms tightened around her baby, her last conscious act one of pure protection. Terror and a primal maternal instinct were all she had left. She tried to snarl, to show teeth, but only a weak whimper escaped her lips. The figure stopped a few feet away, his features lost in the gloom. He didn't look at her. His focus, his entire being, seemed drawn to the tiny bundle in her arms. He wasn't drawn by her scent of sweat and blood and fear, but by the impossible magnetic scent of her child. He took a slow step forward, then another. Elena felt the darkness closing in for good. Her grip on her son slackened. No. Please. Not him. The massive stranger knelt. Strong, impossibly gentle hands scooped them both up from the cold ground, her and the baby. He held them as if they weighed nothing. The last thing she felt before the world went completely black was the solid, unyielding warmth of his chest and the faint, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. It was not a sound of aggression. It was a sound of possession, a sound of awe. It was the sound of a king who had just found his heir. Chapter 8. The Gilded Cage. Alina woke up slowly, drifting up from a deep, dreamless blackness. The first thing she noticed was the softness. She was lying on something incredibly soft, covered by a blanket that felt like woven silk against her skin. The air didn't smell of damp earth and fear. It smelled of beeswax, old stone, and a faint, clean scent of dried lavender. She opened her eyes. She was in a room, a massive room, carved from dark, polished stone. A fire crackled in a hearth so large she could have stood inside it. Rich tapestries depicting ancient hunts hung on the walls, their colors muted by time. It was a place of immense wealth and power, and it was as cold and empty as a tomb. Panic flared. My baby! Her voice was a raw croak. She tried to sit up, her body screaming in protest. He is safe. The voice came from the shadows near the window. The man from the cave stepped into the firelight. The Alpha King. She knew it in her bones. He was even larger than she remembered, dressed in simple, dark clothing that did nothing to hide the raw power coiled in his frame. His hair was the color of a moonless night, and his eyes were a startling, piercing silver like chips of ice. They held no warmth, only a fierce, assessing intelligence. A small bassinet, carved from the same dark wood as the massive bed, sat near the fire. Her son was inside, sleeping peacefully, wrapped in a soft fur blanket. A wave of relief so strong it made her dizzy, washed over her. He was safe. He was warm. The king walked closer, his presence filling the room, making it feel small. He stopped at the foot of the bed. You are in my castle. You are under my protection. Elena watched him, her suspicion a shield. Why? The child, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He didn't look at the baby with the love of a father. He looked at him with the eye of a ruler assessing his legacy. He is Lycan, the firstborn in a century. His scent, it is a beacon, a claim to the throne. He is my heir. The words hung in the air, cold and hard and absolute. My heir, not our son. He is my son, Alina countered, her voice shaking but firm. A flicker of something, annoyance, respect, passed through his silver eyes. And you are his mother, which is why you are alive. He clasped his hands behind his back. A deal was coming, a transaction. You will stay here. You will have food, clothes, protection. No one will harm you. In return, you will raise him. You will care for the future king. It wasn't a request. It was a command. A gilded cage in exchange for her son's life. What choice did she have? I will do anything to keep him safe, she whispered. Good. The word was final. He turned to leave, his duty done. But as he spoke again, his back still to her, she saw it. His hand, clenched at his side, had a slight but noticeable tremor. A tiny crack in the marble facade. My beta, Lyra, will come to inspect you both, he said. the tremor gone as soon as it appeared. We must be certain there is no impurity. He left, the heavy door closing behind him with a sound of finality. Elena looked at her sleeping son, then at the opulent, empty room. She was a prisoner, an asset. And her baby, her beautiful, tiny baby, was a prize to be inspected. Chapter 9. The First Test. Lyra arrived an hour later. She was a tall, severe-looking she-wolf with hair the color of iron and eyes that matched. There was no softness in her, no hint of compassion. She moved with a rigid formality, her scent sharp and clean like cold winter air. She was the perfect reflection of her alpha, all duty and no warmth. She gave Elena a curt, dismissive nod before turning her full attention to the bassinet. "The Alpha King has commanded me to inspect the pup." Elena's protective instincts flared, hot and fierce. She forced herself to remain calm, to sit quietly on the edge of the bed, but every muscle in her body was coiled tight, ready to spring. She would not let this cold, hard woman treat her son like a piece of property. "His name is Kalen," Elena said, her voice quiet but firm. Lyra's lips thinned, a silent rebuke for her audacity. She ignored the comment, her focus entirely on the baby. She reached down, her movements efficient and impersonal, and lifted him from the furs. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She watched, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs as Lyra began her inspection. The she-wolf was thorough. She ran her hands over his small limbs, checking for imperfections. She sniffed his skin, her nostrils flaring as she analyzed his unique, powerful scent. She was searching for any sign of weakness, any hint of the taint that Elena's pack had accused her of. She was looking for a reason to declare him unworthy. Elena sat perfectly still, projecting an aura of calm she was far from feeling. She would not show fear. She would not give this woman the satisfaction. This was her first test in this new cold world, and her son's fate depended on it. She met Lyra's gaze across the room, her expression clear and steady. He is perfect. Kalen, who had been sleeping, stirred and opened his eyes. They were not the hazy blue of a typical newborn. They were a clear, deep gold, shimmering with an inner light. A tiny, perfect replica of the crescent moon scar on Elena's own hand was visible just above his brow, a faint silver mark. He didn't cry. He simply looked at Lyra, his gaze unnervingly intelligent. Lyra froze. Her clinical examination faltered. She stared at the baby's golden eyes, a flicker of disbelief, even awe in her own cold gaze. She held him for a moment longer, then, with a strange, almost reluctant gentleness, she placed him back in the bassinet. From the doorway, the Alpha King watched, a silent shadow. He had been there the whole time. Lyra turned to him and bowed her head. "He is pure," she said, her voice tight with a respect she clearly hadn't expected to feel. "And he is strong. Exceptionally so." The Alpha King's silver eyes moved from the baby to Elena. He said nothing, but she saw it then. The barest hint of a change. The suspicion in his gaze was still there, but it was now joined by a sliver of something else. Something that looked almost like respect. He gave Lyra a sharp, dismissive nod. The she-wolf bowed again and left, but not before giving Elena one last look. A look that said this test was over, but the war for her place here had only just begun. Chapter 10. The Marble King Bleeds. The days in the castle fell into a quiet, cold rhythm. Elena's world was the 4 stone walls of her chambers, the face of her son, and the silent, assessing silver eyes of the Alpha King. He would visit once a day, his presence a heavy weight in the room. He never touched the baby. He would simply stand and watch, a king observing his future, his thoughts a fortress she could not breach. It was a safe existence, a lonely one. She was a well-cared-for ghost in a castle of shadows, haunted by a past she couldn't outrun and tied to a future she didn't understand. This quiet rhythm shattered on a storm-swept afternoon. The door to her chambers burst open, slamming against the stone wall. It wasn't the king. It was Lyra, his iron-willed beta, and for the first time, her composure was gone. Her face was pale, her breathing ragged, and a smear of dark blood was on her cheek. Panic radiated from her in cold waves. "Come. Now," she commanded, her voice sharp with an urgency that stole the air from Elena's lungs. "What is it? What's happened?" Elena asked, already moving, her heart seizing with a sudden terrible fear for her son. "The king," Lyra bit out, already turning to leave. "He's been wounded. Our healers. Their magic does nothing." Elena followed her through the winding, cold corridors of the castle at a near run. Guards bowed their heads as they passed, their faces grim and anxious. The energy in the castle was wrong, thick with fear. They arrived at the king's throne room. It was chaos. Guards were shouting orders, and the metallic scent of blood was thick in the air. And there, slumped on the massive carved stone throne, was the Alpha King. He was a mess of torn leather and blood. A massive, gnarled gash was torn across his ribs, deep and vicious. But it wasn't the wound that was the problem. It was the sickly, black veins that radiated from it, spreading like poisoned roots across his pale skin. His breathing was shallow, his incredible power flickering like a dying flame. The invincible Marble King was dying. Lyra's desperation was a raw, open thing. He was hunting a ghoul orc, a creature of rot. Its claws are cursed. Our healing salves only anger the poison. She turned to Elena, her cold eyes now filled with a desperate plea. "You are different. Your scent, it's one of pure life. You are our only chance." Exposing the king's weakness like this was a catastrophic risk. It could invite challenges, shatter the stability of the entire pack. Lyra was risking everything on her, on an outsider. Elena looked at the dying king, this cold, powerful man who held her son's life in his hands. A part of her, the part that still bled from her own betrayal, whispered that she should let him die. Let this world of cold stone crumble. But then she thought of Kaelin, sleeping peacefully in his bassinet. Her son's fragile safety was tied directly to the life of this man. She had no choice. She had to save him. Pushing past Lyra, she walked toward the throne. The guards tensed, but a low growl from the king stopped them. He lifted his head, his silver eyes clouded with pain but still fiercely intelligent. They locked on hers. "Do it," he rasped, the word a command and a plea all at once. Elena knelt before him. She took a deep breath, pushing aside her fear. She placed her hands on the cold, clammy skin near the poisoned wound. His skin was like ice, but beneath it, a volcano of power simmered, waiting. Chapter 11. The Spark in the Veins. The moment her palms touched his skin, it began. A current of energy, sharp and cold, shot up her arms. It was the poison, the death magic of the ghoul orc. It fought her, a vile and hungry thing that sought to corrupt the life within her. But Elena held firm. She closed her eyes, shutting out the worried faces of the guards, shutting out the cold throne room, shutting out everything but the man in front of her. She focused on the spark of life deep inside herself, the one she had guarded so fiercely for her son. She willed it to flow from her, down her arms, and into him. Warmth met the cold. Life met the decay. The king gasped, his body arching in a silent scream as her power flooded his system. His blood smelled of ozone and iron, a primal scent that filled her head. She could feel his life force, a vast and ancient power, now tangled with the black threads of the curse. Carefully, she began to untangle them. It was like separating strands of silk in the dark, a delicate and exhausting dance of magic. As she worked, the lines between them began to blur. She felt the echo of his pain, the crushing weight of his crown, the profound loneliness of his long life. And he, in turn, felt her grief, her betrayal, the fierce, unbreakable love for her child. Their defenses crumbled, washed away by the raw, intimate exchange of life force. His skin began to warm under her hands, The black veins receded, fading away as her light burned them out. The tension in the room eased, but a new kind of tension was being born. A current, no longer cold and venomous, but hot and electric, began to flow between them. His scent was overwhelming her, a heady mix of power and pine and the unique musk of him. His ragged breaths matched her own. When the last of the poison was gone, she slumped forward, her energy spent. But his hand shot out, catching her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. He pulled her closer, until her face was only inches from his. His silver eyes were no longer clouded with pain. They were blazing, clear and bright and fixed on her with an intensity that made her entire body tremble. The world fell away. There was only the fire in his eyes, the warmth of his skin, and the charged air between them. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claiming. All the loneliness, all the pain, all the unspoken things that had passed between them ignited into a searing flame. It was raw and primal and utterly overwhelming. His hand moved from her arm to the back of her neck, tangling in her hair, pulling her deeper into a kiss that stole the very breath from her lungs. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, the room was silent. Elena stared at him, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. She had thought herself broken, incapable of feeling anything like this ever again. The sheer force of the emotion overwhelmed her. A sob escaped her lips, then another. The terror she had held back for weeks finally broke free. "They said he was tainted," she choked out, tears streaming down her face as she collapsed against his chest. "My baby. What if he is? What if I've brought a curse into your home?" She expected him to push her away, to be furious. Instead, his arms, strong and sure, wrapped around her. He held her tightly against his newly healed body, his hand stroking her hair. He didn't speak. He just held her. And for the first time since she was cast out, Elena felt safe. Chapter 12. The Wolf at the Door. They stayed like that for a long time, the fearsome Alpha King holding the weeping healer in his arms on the steps of his throne. The guards kept a respectful distance, their expressions a mixture of relief and astonishment. The cold, untouchable king was gone. In his place was a man holding a woman as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The dynamic had shattered and reformed into something new. Something fragile, but powerful. Eventually, Elena's tears subsided, leaving her exhausted but lighter. The confession had lifted a terrible weight. The king's silent comfort was more reassuring than 1,000 empty words could ever have been. He finally pulled back, just enough to look at her. His thumb gently wiped a tear from her cheek, his touch sending a shiver through her. "He is not a curse," he said, his voice a low, certain rumble. "He is our future." Our. The word echoed in the space between them, a promise and a claim. Before she could respond, a commotion at the doors of the throne room broke the spell. A scout, his armor dented and his face streaked with dirt and blood, stumbled into the room, pushed forward by the guards. He collapsed to one knee before the throne, his breathing a harsh, painful rasp. "Alpha King!" the scout gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "A message! From the southern border!" The king was on his feet in an instant, his gentle demeanor gone, replaced by the hard mask of a ruler. He was no longer Elena's comforter. He was the Alpha King, and his kingdom was threatened. "Report," he commanded, his voice like the crack of a whip. "It's an army, my lord," the scout stammered, fighting for breath. "We thought it was just the Blood Moon Pack, moving for the alliance Kale proposed. We were wrong." He looked up, his face pale. "Alpha Kale is with them. He's leading them. His pack, the Blood Moon, and a half-dozen smaller clans sworn to him. It's not an alliance he's seeking. It's an invasion." The throne room fell into a deathly silence. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Kale. It all clicked into place. The lies, her exile, it was never just about getting rid of her. It was a cleansing, a way to remove anyone not blindly loyal to him before he made his move. He had used her as a tool to consolidate his power before launching a war. The king stood as still as a statue, processing the news. The scout's words confirmed a betrayal far deeper and more dangerous than anyone had suspected. Kale wasn't just a ruthless alpha. He was a traitor who had unified their enemies against them. Elena watched the king's face. She saw the cold fury settle into his features, the grim resolve hardening his silver eyes. But then his gaze flickered to her, and then in the direction of her chambers where their son slept. It was just for a second, but in that glance, she saw everything. The fight was no longer just about his territory or his title. His eyes promised a war not just for his crown, but for his family. The wolf was at the door, and the king was finally ready to fight for something more than just himself. Chapter 13. An Echo of Betrayal. War preparations turned the cold, quiet castle into a buzzing hive of activity. The air, once still and smelling of stone and beeswax, was now thick with the scent of sharpening steel, anxious sweat, and the simmering energy of a pack readying for battle. Elena spent her time preparing healing salves, her hands busy but her mind restless. The king, Keon, as she'd finally heard Lyra call him, moved through the chaos with a grim, focused calm. Their bond, forged in the heat of his healing and the terror of the coming threat, was a silent, powerful thing that flowed between them in every shared glance. The past arrived on a day when the sky was the color of a fresh bruise. A guard announced a lone wolf approaching under a banner of parley. When he was brought to the courtyard, Elena's blood ran cold. Draven. He looked thinner, his handsome face etched with a desperate, hunted look. But the ambition in his eyes was still there, now curdled with a pathetic sort of cunning. He ignored the king, who watched from the top of the stairs like a stone predator, and directed his words only to Elena. Elena. I was wrong, he began, his voice trying for a tone of deep regret. Kale. He twisted my mind. He promised me power, a place at his side. I never wanted to hurt you. Elena said nothing. She simply looked at him, her face calm, her heart a steady, even drum. The frantic, broken woman he had cast out was gone. He was speaking to a ghost. I can help you. He pressed on, taking a step forward before the king's guards shifted, their hands on their swords. I know Kale's plans, his numbers, his strategies. I can give you everything. Just forgive me. Let me come home. Let me be a father to my son. My son. The words, once the source of her deepest love, were now the measure of his deepest betrayal. She finally moved, walking down the steps until she was only a few feet from him. She could smell the sour scent of his desperation. You don't have a son, she said, her voice soft, but each word a shard of ice. You threw him away. You threw us away, for a promise of power from a tyrant. Elena, please. There is nothing you have that we want. She cut him off, her gaze unwavering. Your information is the word of a traitor, and your forgiveness is worthless. She turned her back on him then, the most final of dismissals. You made your choice in the clearing, Draven. Now live with it. She walked back up the stairs, never looking back, and stood beside the king. Keon didn't speak, but she felt the warmth of his approval, a fierce pride that radiated from him. He had watched her face her past not with tears or anger, but with the cold, unbreakable strength of a queen, and in that moment, as he looked at her, she saw it in his silver eyes, clear and undeniable. It wasn't just respect, it wasn't just partnership, it was love. Draven, left alone and utterly rejected in the courtyard, stared at her back with a look of pure, venomous hatred. His pathetic plea for forgiveness curdled into a silent vow of revenge. Chapter 14. The Silver Crescent. They came 2 days later, a pack emerging from the mists of the northern woods. They were lean, wary wolves, their fur the color of moonlight on snow. They did not look like an invading army, but they did not look like friends either. Their leader stepped forward, a tall male with intelligent green eyes and a crescent-shaped scar on his cheek that mirrored the mark on Elena's hand and on her son's forehead. Elena's breath caught. Elias. The name was a whisper, a memory from a life she thought long buried. Before the Alpha King could react, before the guards could draw their weapons, she went to him, her hand outstretched. She had to tell him. Now. A partnership built on a secret was no better than the lies that had destroyed her past. Kian, she said, turning to face him, her heart pounding. This was the ultimate test of his trust. My grandmother, she was not from Blackwood. She was a healer who fled her home during a purge years ago. She was from the Silver Crescent Pack. She gestured to the newcomer. Elias is my cousin. A heavy silence fell over the courtyard. The Silver Crescent Pack had a reputation for being secretive, reclusive, and fiercely loyal to their own bloodline. For the king, this could be a threat, a trick, a Trojan horse. She saw the flicker of his old distrust in his silver eyes, the instinctive clenching of his hand. He was a king who had survived by trusting no one. Elias stepped forward, bowing his head respectfully to Kian, but his eyes were on Elena. We did not come to fight you, Alpha King. We came because we heard a rumor of a child born with the mark of the moon. His gaze softened as he looked at Elena. A child of our lost bloodline. He then turned back to the king, his expression hardening. We also came because the one who hunts our blood is the same one who marches on your lands. Kale's family has been trying to wipe out the Silver Crescent line for generations, believing a prophecy that a child born of our blood would unite the packs and end their reign of terror. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The prophecy. Kale's obsession with purity and wiping out weakness. It was never just ambition. It was a generations-old blood feud. And her son, Kalen, was at the very center of it. Kian looked from Elias to Elena, his gaze lingering on her face. He saw the truth in her eyes, the vulnerability of her confession. He saw her not as a potential threat, but as the key, the unifier. He made a decision, not just as a king making a strategic choice, but as a male trusting his mate. You are welcome in my lands, Kian announced, his voice ringing with authority. Your people will be given shelter, and your warriors will fight alongside mine. A wave of relief washed over Elena. He trusted her. He truly trusted her. Elias smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression, and stepped forward to embrace her in the familiar hug of family. As he held her, Elena glanced over at Kian. He was watching them, a look of grim resolve on his face. But she saw his hand clench again, this time with a flicker of something entirely different. A raw, possessive, and utterly human spark of jealousy. Chapter 15. The First Blood. The alliance was a fragile, hopeful thing. The Silver Crescent wolves, though wary, began to integrate with Kian's pack, their combined forces creating a formidable front line along the castle's outer walls. A sense of purpose, of unity against a common foe settled over the fortress. For a brief moment, it felt like they might actually have a chance. The attack came when they least expected it. Not at the main gate, not at the fortified walls. It came from the sky. Elena was in a sheltered garden with Kalen and Elias discussing the old prophecy when the air was split by a series of piercing shrieks. Massive, bat-like creatures, twisted things of black leather and sharp claws, Kale's cursed scouts dove from the sky. Chaos erupted. These weren't soldiers trying to breach a wall. They were assassins sent with a single purpose. Their target was clear. They ignored the guards, their glowing red eyes fixed on Elena, her son, and Elias. It was a personal strike aimed directly at the heart of the new alliance and the king's newfound hope. Elias shifted instantly, his lithe silver form a blur of motion as he ripped one of the creatures from the air. Guards swarmed the garden, their swords and claws meeting the descending threat. Elena's world narrowed to a single roaring point of terror. She clutched Kalen to her chest, shielding his small body with her own, and scrambled for cover. A creature landed in front of her, its jaws snapping, its stench like rotting meat. She braced for the attack, for the searing pain. A black and gray hurricane of fury slammed into it. Kian. He had shifted into his lichen form, a creature of breathtaking size and power, far larger than any normal wolf. He was a whirlwind of claws and teeth, a living embodiment of a king's rage. He tore the beast apart, his guttural snarls echoing off the stone walls. But there were too many. Another one dove, its claws extended, aiming for Elena's exposed back. She saw it a split second too late. There was no time to move, no time to scream. Kian threw himself in front of her. He didn't have time to attack. He just took the blow. The creature's claws, dripping with the same black poison that had nearly killed him before, raked across his shoulder and chest. He roared, a sound of pure agony, and swatted the beast from the sky, breaking its back with a single, powerful blow. The attack was over as quickly as it began, the remaining creatures scattering back into the stormy sky. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the whimpers of the wounded. Elena rushed to Kian's side as he shifted back, stumbling to one knee. The gashes were deep, and the familiar, sickly black veins were already beginning to spread from the wounds. He clutched his shoulder, his face pale, his breathing harsh. She screamed his name. "Kian!" He looked up at her, and the raw, unfiltered expression on his face shattered her heart. It wasn't the stoic pain of a warrior. It wasn't the fury of a king. For the first time, she saw pure, undiluted fear in his silver eyes. And it wasn't for himself. It was for her, and for the child she held in her arms. The war was no longer at their doorstep. It was in their home. And the king had just shed his first blood for his family. Chapter 16. The Poison in the Soul. The battle raged outside the thick stone walls of the keep, a symphony of snarls, screams, and the clang of steel. But inside the king's private chambers, the only sound was Kian's shallow, ragged breathing. Elena had managed to get him here, with Lyra and Elias holding the line at the doors, but she was losing him. The poison was different this time. Faster. More vicious. She pressed her hands to the wound, pushing her healing energy into him until she was dizzy and trembling with the effort. It was like pouring water into sand. The black veins would recede for a moment under her touch, only to creep back with renewed hunger the second she faltered. This poison wasn't just attacking his body, it was attacking his spirit. "It's no use," he rasped, his voice a faint whisper against the sounds of war. His silver eyes, once so full of fire, were dimming to a dull pewter. "Don't say that," Elena pleaded, tears of frustration and terror blurring her vision. She pushed more energy into him, ignoring the screaming protest of her own muscles. "I healed you once. I can do it again." He managed a weak, heartbreaking smile. His hand, cold and trembling, came up to touch her cheek. That was different. The poison. It finds the cracks inside you, the weak places. His gaze was filled with a lifetime of pain, of loneliness, of a burden carried for too long. "My cracks are too deep." "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." "My power is a shield," he breathed, his thumb stroking her skin. "Not a soul. I spent so long believing love was a weakness, that I was too broken for it. And now that I have it," he coughed, a racking, painful sound that shook his entire frame. "I am too broken to keep it, to keep you safe." His deepest fear, laid bare in his dying moments. Not that he would lose his kingdom, but that he was unworthy of the love he had finally found. Her healing touch did nothing, because the poison wasn't just in his blood this time. It was in his soul, feeding on his own despair. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy of a man who believed he was beyond redemption. "That is not true," she said, her voice fierce with a love that defied the poison, the war, everything. Your love doesn't make me weak. It makes me stronger. You make me stronger. A loud crash echoed from the hallway. The sounds of fighting were getting closer, sharper. The keep had been breached. Lyra's sharp command was cut off by a pained cry. The heavy oak doors to the chamber shuddered in their iron frame. Once, twice. On the third blow, the lock splintered, and the doors burst inward. Kian's eyes widened, not in fear for himself, but for her. The poison now had the victory it sought. He was helpless to protect his mate. Chapter 17. The Face of the Past. The wolves that poured into the room were not Kyle's blood moon savages. Elena knew their faces. She knew their scents. It was her old pack. The people who had watched her fall to her knees in the clearing, their eyes cold and condemning. They were led by a warrior whose face was a mask of grim satisfaction, and beside him was Anya. Elena's heart stopped. Not the Anya from her past, the bitter elder from Blackwood. This was a different Anya, a quiet she-wolf who had arrived as a refugee months ago, taken in by Kian's mercy. An Anya who had helped Elena with Kaelin, who had brought her meals, who had shared quiet smiles with her. An Anya she had started to think of as a friend. This Anya's smile was gone. Her eyes, once kind, were now filled with a cold, fanatic light. She held a silver dagger, its surface gleaming in the firelight. Anya, Elena whispered, the name a question filled with disbelief and a new, sickening wave of betrayal. He is a false king, Anya said, her voice clear and ringing with absolute conviction. She gestured to the wounded Kian. He harbors traitors and taints his pack with impure blood. Her gaze flicked to Kaelin, who was stirring in his bassinet nearby, sensing the tension. "What are you doing?" Elena cried, scrambling to her feet to stand between them and Kian. "He gave you shelter. He showed you mercy." "Mercy is a weakness," Anya spat, the words a chilling echo of Kael's philosophy. "Loyalty is strength. My loyalty has always been to the true Alpha, the one who will cleanse this land and restore our honor." She raised the dagger. "My loyalty is to Alpha Kael." It was the final, most cruel twist of the knife. Her past and present, colliding in the ultimate act of treachery. Her deepest fear, that she was a magnet for betrayal, that her trust was a curse, was proven true in the most devastating way possible. Every kind word from Anya, every shared smile, had been a lie. A tool to get close, to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Elena had led a serpent into the heart of the castle, and now it was here to kill her king, her mate. "You won't touch him," Elena snarled, her own grief and rage coalescing into a protective fury she didn't know she possessed. She stood over Kian, a healer-turned shield, with nothing but her body to protect him. Anya gave her a look of pity. "You poor, stupid girl. You were never the problem. You were just the key." She took a step forward, the dagger held ready. "Kael wants the child unharmed, but you, and the false king, you are the last of the poison to be cleansed." The other wolves fanned out, their expressions grim, their loyalty absolute. Elena was surrounded, her last hope bleeding out on the floor behind her, and her only friend revealed as her final, most intimate enemy. Chapter 18. A Cry of Gold. Anya moved forward, the silver dagger a cold promise. The other wolves closed in, a tightening circle of doom. Elena's world narrowed to the point of that blade, to the cold, dead eyes of the woman she had trusted. There was no escape. This was the end. Her body tensed, ready for the blow. And then Kaelin cried out. It was not the normal, wavering cry of an infant. This was a sound that seemed to come from the very dawn of time. It was a note of pure, concentrated power that didn't just strike the ears, it struck the soul. With the cry, a wave of visible energy, a ripple of shimmering gold light, pulsed outward from his bassinet. It was not violent. It was not an attack. It was a silencing. The wave washed over the room. The advancing wolves froze in place, their snarls dying in their throats. Their eyes went wide, not with pain, but with a profound, overwhelming awe. Anya stopped mid-stride, the dagger trembling in her hand as the golden light enveloped her. All aggression, all hatred, all fanatic loyalty was simply erased, washed away by a power so pure and absolute it defied comprehension. Elena stared, breathless. Her son. He wasn't a curse. He wasn't tainted. He was this incredible, impossible power. The prophecy. A child born of our blood would unite the packs. It wasn't about politics or war. It was about this, a power that could wash away hatred itself. On the floor, Kian's eyes fluttered open. He had felt it. The wave of his son's energy had washed over him, a jolt of pure life that pushed back the poison for a precious second. He saw the scene, the frozen wolves, the stunned Anya, Elena standing guard, and the golden light fading around his son. He saw the mortal danger they were still in. A guttural, agonized sound was ripped from his chest. With the last dregs of his strength fueled by a father's protective rage and the echo of his son's magic, he forced the change. It was a broken, terrible transformation. Muscle and bone tore and reshaped, but the poison fought him every inch of the way. His half-formed lichen shape was a nightmare of torn flesh and twisted limbs, blood and black poison matting his fur. He rose, unsteady, a monstrous, dying king. He threw his head back and howled. The sound that filled the chamber was not the proud roar of an alpha. It was a sound of pure, heart-shattering agony. It was the howl of a male who had finally found everything he never knew he wanted, only to be forced to watch, helpless and dying as it was about to be torn away. It was a scream of love, of rage, and of utter, soul-crushing despair that echoed through the stone halls of his crumbling kingdom. Chapter 19. The Strength in the Bond. The golden echo of Kaelin's cry faded, leaving a stunned, ringing silence in its wake. The wolves from Blackwood stood frozen, their eyes wide and vacant, the fanaticism momentarily wiped clean. Anya trembled, the silver dagger slipping from her numb fingers and clattering to the stone floor. Kian's agonized howl died in his throat, his broken lichen form shuddering with the effort. This was their chance. A sliver of time, a heartbeat of chaos bought by her son. Elena's mind, once clouded with terror, was now shockingly clear. She scooped Kaelin from his bassinet, his small body warm and humming with a residual power. Her son was not a weapon, but his very existence was a shield. A thought, cold and strategic, took root. Run. Kian, sensing her intention, let out a low, pained whine. He tried to move toward her to follow, but his wounded body collapsed, and he shifted back into his human form with a groan of pure agony. He lay on the floor, bleeding, helpless. "Go!" he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Take the boy. Get him safe. Leave me." It was the ultimate sacrifice for him. A king who had never relied on anyone, now telling his mate to abandon him for the sake of their legacy. It was the whisper of a man who still believed he was too broken to be saved. Elena looked from his pain-filled silver eyes to the child in her arms. The old Elena, the one who had fled into the woods, would have run. She would have done anything to save her baby. But she was not that woman anymore. That woman was gone, burned away in the fires of betrayal and rebirth. "No," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she had. She walked back to his side, kneeling in the spreading pool of his blood. "We don't leave family behind. Your strength is not a shield, Kian. It's an anchor. But my strength is in our bond. I am not leaving you." She was no longer just a victim. She was no longer just a mother fighting for her child. She was a mate, fighting for her king. She was a hero, refusing to let the man she loved believe he was beyond redemption. The spell holding the other wolves was beginning to break. They stirred, confusion warring with their ingrained orders. Anya shook her head, her eyes refocusing on Elena with renewed hatred. They were out of time. Just as Anya lunged, the chamber doors exploded inward again. But these were not enemies. Elias, his silver wolf form streaked with blood, led a charge of his crescent warriors. They slammed into the Blackwood wolves, a whirlwind of silver fur and righteous fury. "Elena, this way!" Elias shouted, nodding toward a tapestry on the far wall. "There's a hidden passage behind it." Hope, fierce and bright, surged through Elena. With Elias's warriors covering their retreat, she helped Kian to his feet, draping his arm over her shoulders. He was a dead weight, barely conscious, but she held him up. Together, a broken king, a defiant healer, and a child of prophecy. They disappeared behind the ancient tapestry into the darkness of the castle's hidden veins, leaving the sounds of battle behind them. Chapter 20. The Queen's Gambit. The secret passage was a narrow, suffocating tunnel that smelled of dust and forgotten centuries. It led them deep into the foundations of the castle, to a small, hidden chamber known only to the royal bloodline. Here, for a moment, they were safe. Elias posted his best warriors at the entrance while Elena worked frantically, using the last of her energy to slow the poison spreading through Kian's veins. It wasn't a cure, but it was buying him time. Kian lay on a stone slab, pale and weak, but his silver eyes were lucid. They followed Elena's every move, filled with a raw, wondering awe. He had told her to run, to save herself. He had accepted his fate. But she had refused. She had bound his life to hers, not as a weakness, but as a source of strength. "Kyle has the numbers," Elias said grimly, pacing the small chamber. "His main force is at the gates. We've managed to scatter his assassins, but the castle won't hold for long. We have no army left to command." "Yes, we do," Elena said, looking up from her work. Her voice was quiet, but it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. The terror was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. "Kian's pack is not broken. They're scattered, leaderless. They need a call to arms, a place to rally." Kian looked at her, a flicker of his old power returning to his gaze. "A mental command. I can try, but it will take everything I have left." "It will be enough," Elena insisted. She turned to Elias. "The Whispering Canyons, east of here. My grandmother taught me the paths. The acoustics are treacherous. A small, organized force could hold off an army 10 times its size by creating rock slides and ambushes." She looked back at Kian. "Give the command. Tell them to meet us there. We'll make our stand in the canyons." It was a desperate, dangerous plan. A queen's gambit, sacrificing their stronghold for the chance at a final, decisive battle on ground of her own choosing. Elias looked at her, his green eyes wide with respect for his long-lost cousin, the healer who was now planning a war. Kian pushed himself up on one elbow, his focus entirely on Elena. He saw her. Not as the fragile woman he had found in a cave, not as the mother of his heir, but as the leader she had become. A warrior. A strategist. A queen. The poison was killing him, but in his heart, a new kind of strength was being born. The strength to trust, to follow, to believe in her. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. A faint silver light began to glow in his eyes as he gathered his remaining power. He was about to risk everything on her plan. On her. "You are my Luna," he whispered, the words a formal declaration, a sacred vow. He closed his eyes, his mind reaching out across the battlefield, across the territories, a silent, desperate call to his pack. Then he opened them again, his gaze locking with hers, his trust absolute. "Lead the way." Chapter 21. The Field of Truth. Their army was a fractured, desperate thing. A handful of Kian's royal guard, bloodied but unbroken. Elias's lean, grim-faced Silver Crescent warriors. And trickling into the hidden mouth of the Whispering Canyons came the loyalists, Dozens of wolves from Kian's pack who had heard his call and risked everything to answer. They were a ragtag force, bound together not by numbers, but by a fierce, defiant hope. Elena stood at the head of them, Kian leaning heavily at her side. He was weak, the poison a constant, draining presence. But he was there. He stood beside her, a visible symbol of his trust, his power now hers to command. She was no longer Elena the healer. She was the acting alpha, the Luna of a king too wounded to lead, and the entire fate of their world rested on her shoulders. They marched from the canyons to the open plains before them. There, Kale's army was assembled. It was a vast, dark sea of wolves, a force that dwarfed their own. At the center of it, proud and arrogant, sat Kyle on a massive black warhorse, and surrounding him, like a grotesque honor guard, were the familiar faces of the Blackwood pack, her old family, now her enemies. A sharp, familiar pang of grief cut through her resolve, but she pushed it down. That life was over. The two armies faced each other across a field of windswept grass, a field of truth, where all the lies would finally be burned away. Kyle's laughter, a harsh and ugly sound, carried across the distance. He had been expecting a last pathetic stand from the castle guards. Not this. Not a unified force emerging from the wilderness. His eyes scanned the front line, and then they locked on Elena. His laughter died in his throat. A look of pure, uncomprehending shock washed over his face. Her, the traitor, the weak, tainted she-wolf he had personally cast out, the one he had left to die in the wilderness, standing there, alive. Not just alive, but leading an army against him. The crescent mark on her hand seemed to glow in the dim light, a symbol of the bloodline he had tried so desperately to extinguish. His shock curdled into a snarl of pure, venomous rage. She was an impossibility, a ghost who had returned from the grave not to haunt him, but to destroy him. Elena met his gaze across the field, her own expression a mask of cold, hard resolve. The final battle was not just for a kingdom anymore. It was for the truth. And it was about to begin. Chapter 22. The Canyon's Roar. Now, Elena's voice, clear and sharp, cut through the tense silence. It was the signal. From the ridges of the canyons, Elias and his Silver Crescent warriors sent the first volley of boulders crashing down, not onto Kale's army, but onto the slopes beside them. The ground shook. A massive rockslide thundered down into the narrow pass that served as Kale's only retreat, sealing the trap. The battlefield had become a cage. Chaos erupted. Kale's forces, a mix of fanatics and deceived packs, broke ranks in confusion. Elena's smaller, more disciplined army charged. The clash of the two forces was a roar of fury and steel. Elena stayed at the command point, her son held safely by a trusted Silver Crescent elder, her eyes scanning the battle. She directed her warriors with hand signals, exploiting the weaknesses in Kale's disorganized horde. Beside her, Kian fought with a desperate, terrifying strength. Weakened as he was, the poison still in his veins, he was a force of nature. Every blow he struck was to protect her, to keep the battle from reaching her. He carved a path directly toward the black warhorse, his silver eyes locked on the one man responsible for all of this. Kale met his charge, his face a mask of fury. The two alphas slammed into each other, a battle of titans. But Elena knew this fight would not be won by claws and teeth alone. It had to be won by truth. While the battle raged below, she climbed. Guided by Elias, she found a path to a high, flat ledge that overlooked the entire battlefield, a natural amphitheater. The wind howled around her, whipping her hair across her face. She took a deep breath. She didn't shout. She spoke. And the magic of the canyons, or perhaps the latent power in her own blood, carried her voice. It swept across the battlefield, clear and undeniable, cutting through the din of war. Wolves of the plains, wolves of Blackwood. Her voice rang out, imbued with a power that made everyone, friend and foe, pause and look up. You are fighting and dying for a lie, she cried. Alpha Kale has not brought you here for honor or for strength. He brought you here to settle a generations-old blood feud. She pointed a trembling hand toward Kale, who had frozen, his sword raised against Kian. His family has spent a century hunting the Silver Crescent Pack trying to exterminate their line, not because they are weak, but because of a prophecy that foretold a child of their blood would unite the packs and bring an end to tyranny. A confused murmur rippled through Kale's army. They looked at each other, then at the silver-furred warriors fighting beside Kian, and then back at the woman on the ledge. He cast me out, Elena's voice boomed, filled with the pain of her past. And he called my son tainted. He lied to you. He used my name to justify his purge of anyone who would not support his war. She raised her chin, her voice ringing with the absolute power of truth. My son is the child of that prophecy. He carries the crescent mark of the Silver Crescent Pack and the blood of the Alpha King. He is not a curse to be feared. He is the promise of a united future. Kale is so desperate to prevent. The wolves of Blackwood stared at her. They saw the crescent mark on her hand. They remembered the lies they had been fed. They saw their true alpha, Kian, fighting not for conquest, but to defend his mate. The lie shattered. With a roar of fury, a Blackwood warrior turned his sword not on Kian's forces, but on a Blood Moon soldier beside him. Then another, and another. Kale's army turned on itself. His foundation of lies had crumbled, and he was being consumed by the very fire he had started. Kian, seeing his chance, drove his attack home. The battle was over. Truth had won. Chapter 23. A King on His Knees. The silence that fell after the battle was heavy, broken only by the cries of the wounded and the whisper of the wind through the canyon. The fighting was done. Kyle was defeated, his remaining loyalists captured by the very packs they had once commanded. The wolves of Blackwood stood apart, their heads bowed in shame, their gazes fixed on the ground. Elena made her way through the field of fallen warriors, her heart aching for the needless loss. She found Kian near the center of it all, leaning heavily on his sword, the black veins of the poison already creeping back, no longer held at bay by the fire of battle. He was alive, but the poison was finally winning its silent war. She rushed to his side, her hands immediately going to his wounds. Kian. He looked at her, his silver eyes full of a deep, weary love. You saved us, he whispered. Your truth. It was a sharper sword than any I possess. Hush now, she murmured, pouring her energy into him. Save your strength. This time, her healing worked. With the lies broken, with the threat to their family gone, the poison in his soul had nothing left to cling to. His despair was replaced by hope. His fear was replaced by love. Elena felt the curse dissolving under her hands, the black veins fading away not into his skin, but into nothingness. The light of her magic, fueled by her love and his own will to live, cleansed him completely. When it was done, he stood tall, his strength returned, his silver eyes clear and bright. He was whole again. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plains, the newly unified packs gathered. They were a strange mix of Kian's warriors, Elias's silver crescents, and the shamed but repentant wolves of Blackwood. They were an army without a leader, a people without a king. Then Kian stepped forward, Elena at his side. He surveyed the crowd, his gaze powerful and clear. But he didn't give a speech about victory or glory. He turned to Elena, and in front of everyone, warriors, elders, traitors, he went down on one knee. A collective gasp went through the crowd. A king did not kneel. Ever. He took her hand, the one with the crescent scar, and held it in both of his. I have been a king of stone and shadows for longer than most of you have been alive, he said, his voice ringing with a humility and emotion no one had ever heard from him before. I ruled a kingdom, but I had no home. I had power, but I had no strength. His silver eyes, filled with a love so profound it was a tangible force, locked on hers. This woman taught me what true strength is. It is not found in a crown, but in a bond. She healed my body, but more than that, she healed my soul." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed the scar. "I name Elena my Luna, not for my heir, but for the queen she already is, my partner, my mate, my heart." He stood, and a cheer erupted from the crowd, a single unified roar of approval and joy. Elena looked at him, tears of happiness streaming down her face as he sealed his vow with a kiss that promised not a kingdom, but a lifetime. Chapter 24. The Promise in a Scar. Months later, a gentle peace had settled over the lands. The castle, once a cold and silent fortress, was now a place of warmth and life. The halls, once empty, echoed with the sounds of two packs learning to become one family. The Silver Crescent and the Royal Pack were intertwined now, their histories and futures bound together by the small, golden-eyed boy who was heir to both. Elena stood on the grand balcony overlooking the valley, a soft breeze carrying the scent of pine and wild honeysuckle. Kaelin was asleep in her arms, his small chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The world felt right, whole. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and Kian's familiar warmth enveloped her. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his gaze following hers out over the moonlit landscape. They stood in a comfortable silence for a long time, watching the stars begin to prick the deep velvet of the sky. "It's quiet," she murmured, leaning her head back against his chest. "It's peace," he rumbled, his voice soft in her ear. "Something I never thought I would have, or that I even deserved." She turned in his arms to face him, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. "We made it, Kian. We made it together." He smiled, a true, gentle smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "You made it. You faced your past and saved our future. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Elena." He took her hand, the one he had held that day on the battlefield, and brought it to his lips. His thumb gently traced the faint silver crescent-shaped scar there. For so long, that mark had been a symbol of what she had lost, a painful reminder of a past defined by others. It was the brand of a lonely healer, the scar of a cast-out traitor. But now, held in the hand of the man who loved her, it was something else entirely. It was a mark of survival. It was the emblem of her heritage. It was the symbol of a queen. As his fingers intertwined with hers, the scar was no longer a reminder of her past, but a promise of their future. A future they had built not on power or prophecy, but on the simple, unbreakable truth that two broken souls could find a way to heal each other and build a family stronger than any kingdom.